The wheels groaned against the cracked earth, each rotation a prayer that went unanswered. Sarah May Thornton gripped the reins until her knuckles turned white, her hands raw from 3 days of driving the rickety wagon across the Badlands of New Mexico territory. The mule, a stubborn creature she'd bought with the last of her mother's silver spoons, stumbled over another rock, and the wagon lurched sideways. "Easy now, Moses," she whispered, though her voice cracked like the drought-stricken ground beneath them. The mule's ears flicked back, acknowledging her words but offering no comfort. The sun hung merciless in the October sky, a burning eye that seemed to follow her flight from Silver Creek. 300 miles behind her lay the ashes of what she'd once called home, a 2-room cabin where love had turned to something darker, where gentle touches had become gripping hands, where sweet words had curdled into accusations that still echoed in her mind. Worthless, barren, no good to nobody. Sarah May touched the bruise on her collarbone, hidden beneath the high collar of her traveling dress. It had faded from purple to yellow-green, but she could still feel William's fingers there, could still hear the crash of the whiskey bottle against the wall when she'd told him she was leaving. The wagon wheel caught in a deep rut, and with a sound like breaking bones, the axle snapped, the wagon bed tilted sharply, sending her few possessions sliding: a carpet bag with 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a tin of biscuits, and the Colt .45 she'd taken from William's drawer while he lay drunk on the kitchen floor. Moses brayed in protest as the harness pulled tight against his chest. Sarah May half fell, half climbed from the driver's bench, her boots hitting the hard ground with a jarring thud. She stood there, staring at the broken wheel, and for the first time since leaving Silver Creek, she wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. "Well, ain't that fitting?" she said to the empty horizon. "Can't even run away proper." The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, red rocks jutting from the earth like accusing fingers, sparse juniper trees offering no shade, and in the distance, the dark line of mountains that might as well have been the edge of the world. She'd been following the old Spanish trail, or what she thought was the trail. Now, with the wagon crippled and the sun beginning its descent toward the western peaks, she realized how thoroughly alone she was. A cold wind kicked up, carrying the scent of sage and something else: rain. Sarah May looked north and saw them. Clouds building dark and heavy, moving fast across the sky like riders bearing down on prey. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. She unhitched Moses quickly, her fingers fumbling with the leather straps. The mule, sensing the storm, stamped nervously. There was no time to salvage much from the wagon. She grabbed the carpet bag, the pistol, and threw her mother's worn wool blanket over her shoulders. The Bible she hesitated over, then left it. God hadn't been listening lately anyway. The first fat drops of rain hit just as she spotted a cluster of rocks that might offer some shelter. She pulled Moses toward them, but the mule planted his hooves, eyes rolling white as the wind picked up to a howl. "Come on, you stubborn—" Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the ground. The rain came then, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had overturned a massive bucket. Within seconds, Sarah May was soaked through, her dress clinging to her body, her hair plastered to her head. She could barely see 5 feet ahead. The rocks she'd spotted vanished in the gray curtain of rain. Moses pulled free from her grip and disappeared into the storm, his panicked braying lost in the wind. Sarah May stumbled forward, clutching the carpet bag, the pistol heavy in her other hand. The ground turned to mud, sucking at her boots. She fell twice, the second time landing hard on her knees. The pain shot through her, sharp and real, and for a moment she stayed there, kneeling in the mud like she was praying. But there were no words left in her, no pleas to make. William had been right about one thing: she was alone, had always been alone, would die alone out here in this God-forsaken wilderness. The wind drove needles of rain into her face. She could no longer tell which direction she'd come from or where she was going. The world had shrunk to this: mud, rain, cold, and the weight of the pistol in her hand. She thought about using it. One shot, quick and clean, Better than freezing to death or drowning in a flash flood. But something stubborn in her, the same thing that had made her pack that carpet bag 3 nights ago while William snored, made her struggle to her feet. She pushed forward, though forward had lost all meaning. Time became fluid. Had she been walking for minutes or hours? The storm showed no sign of breaking. Then, through the rain, she saw it. A flash of orange light. Fire. Her first thought was that the lightning had struck something, but the light was too steady, too contained. She stumbled toward it, her numb feet catching on invisible rocks. The light grew stronger, and she could make out the mouth of a shallow cave beneath an overhang of red rock. The fire burned just inside, protected from the rain. She was maybe 20 feet away when she saw him. He sat cross-legged by the fire, his back straight as a lodgepole pine, seemingly unbothered by the storm raging just beyond the cave mouth. Long black hair fell past his shoulders, and even in the flickering firelight, she could see the sharp planes of his face, the copper tone of his skin. He wore leather leggings and a shirt that might have been white once, but was now the color of the desert itself. Sarah May stopped, the pistol suddenly heavy in her hand. He hadn't moved, hadn't even looked up, but she knew he was aware of her. The stillness in him was not the stillness of ignorance, but of waiting. A choice hung before her: stay in the storm and die, or approach the fire and risk whatever this man might do. After what she'd survived with William, after the names he'd called her and the ways he'd tried to break her spirit, death by violence seemed almost mundane. She took a step forward, then another. The man lifted his head then, and their eyes met across the rain-swept darkness. His eyes were dark as the storm clouds, unreadable as the desert itself. He said nothing, made no gesture of welcome or warning. He simply watched. Sarah May reached the edge of the cave, water streaming from her clothes to puddle at her feet. They regarded each other in silence, the fire crackling between them. She waited for him to speak, to tell her to leave, to demand something from her. But he only reached to his left and picked up a piece of wood, adding it to the fire. The gesture was neither invitation nor dismissal, just a practical action that somehow made space for her in the circle of warmth. She entered the cave slowly, ready to run despite her exhaustion, but he turned his attention back to the fire, as if strange women stumbling out of storms were an everyday occurrence. Sarah May sank down opposite him, still clutching the carpetbag and pistol. The heat from the fire hit her like a physical force, and she began to shiver violently as her body remembered what warmth felt like. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cave, there was only the pop of burning wood and the sound of water dripping from her dress. The man reached into a leather pouch beside him and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it to reveal strips of dried meat, which he laid on a flat stone near the fire to warm. Sarah May watched him work, noting the scars on his hands, the way he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years living in these wild places. Everything about him was foreign to her. His silence, his calm, the way he seemed to exist in harmony with the harsh landscape that was trying to kill her. She didn't realize she was still holding the pistol until he glanced at it, then at her face. There was no fear in his expression, only a mild curiosity, as if wondering what she planned to do with it. Sarah May looked down at the gun in her hand, seeing it suddenly for what it was, a cold, heavy reminder of the world she'd fled. Slowly, she set it down beside her, though still within reach. The man nodded, just once, and pushed one of the warmed strips of meat across the stone floor toward her. Sarah May stared at it, this simple offering from a stranger, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but breaking open, like the first fissure in a dam. She reached for the meat with trembling fingers, brought it to her mouth, and tasted salt and smoke and survival. Outside, lightning illuminated the desert in stark, white flashes, showing her the broken wagon in the distance. Moses nowhere to be seen. But inside the cave, there was warmth and food, and the peculiar safety found in the presence of someone who expected nothing from her, as she ate. Sarah May studied the man across the fire. He couldn't have been more than 35, though the desert had a way of aging people. His face was unlined but weathered, and when he moved to tend the fire, she saw he favored his left leg slightly. A warrior, perhaps, or a hunter. Certainly someone who knew these lands better than she ever would. The silence between them stretched on, but it was not uncomfortable. After years of William's drunken rambling, of accusations and demands, and the constant need to explain herself, the quiet felt like a gift. She finished the meat and pulled the wet blanket tighter around her shoulders, though it offered little warmth. The man rose smoothly, disappearing into the shadows at the back of the cave. Sarah May tensed, her hand inching toward the pistol. But he returned moments later with another blanket, a woven thing of red and brown that looked handmade. He set it near her, not too close, then returned to his place by the fire. She wanted to thank him, but her throat felt closed, and somehow words seemed unnecessary. Instead, she exchanged her soaked blanket for the dry one, wrapping it around herself and feeling, for the first time in 3 days, perhaps in 3 years, something approaching safe. The storm continued its assault on the desert, but the cave held steady, a pocket of calm in the chaos. Sarah May's eyes grew heavy, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. She fought it, knowing sleep made her vulnerable, but her body had reached its limit. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the man's profile against the fire, still as stone, keeping watch, a guardian she hadn't asked for, hadn't earned, but desperately needed. And somewhere in the space between waking and sleep, she heard her mother's voice, soft as spring rain. Sometimes, child, salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sarah May woke to silence. The storm had passed, leaving only the drip of water from the cave mouth and the soft crackle of embers. Gray dawn light filtered in, revealing the desert transformed, puddles reflecting the sky like broken mirrors. The red rocks darkened to the color of dried blood. The man was gone. She sat up quickly, the woven blanket falling from her shoulders. Her clothes had dried stiff against her body, and every muscle ached from yesterday's ordeal. The fire still glowed with fresh wood added recently, and beside it sat a clay pot with water and more strips of dried meat wrapped in cloth. Sarah May stood slowly, her legs protesting. She moved to the cave entrance and looked out across the rain-washed landscape. There, on a ridge perhaps a quarter-mile away, she saw him. He stood motionless against the brightening sky, facing east toward the rising sun. Even at this distance, she could see the straightness of his posture, the way his hair moved in the morning breeze. She drank from the clay pot, the water cool and slightly mineral, then wrapped the meat in her handkerchief and tucked it into her carpet bag. Her pistol lay where she'd left it, and she hesitated before picking it up. In the morning light, it looked out of place, a harsh reminder of the world she'd fled. When she looked back at the ridge, he was walking toward her, moving down the rocky slope with the sure-footed grace of someone who'd traveled these paths since childhood. As he drew closer, she could see more clearly what darkness and exhaustion had hidden the night before. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 28 years. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pale against his sun-darkened skin. His eyes, she saw now, were not black but deep brown, like the earth after rain. He stopped about 10 feet from the cave, studying her with the same calm intensity she'd noticed the night before. Sarah May found herself straightening, pushing loose strands of hair behind her ears, aware suddenly of how she must look, dress torn and muddy, face likely streaked with dirt, the yellowing bruise on her collarbone visible above her collar. "Your mule," he said, and his voice surprised her, low and measured, with only a trace of accent. "Found him this morning. He waits by the rocks there." He gestured north, where she could make out a cluster of boulders. "Thank you," she managed, her own voice hoarse from disuse. He nodded. Then his gaze moved to her wagon in the distance, tilted and broken like the skeleton of some ancient beast. "You travel alone." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. Yes. The trail to Santa Fe is south. You were going north. Sarah May felt heat rise in her cheeks. I got turned around. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, the carpet bag that held too few supplies for a proper journey, the way she kept the pistol close but not quite aimed. Running, he said finally. Not traveling. The words should have frightened her. If he knew she was running, he might guess there was someone chasing her, might decide she was too much trouble, but there was no judgment in his tone, just observation. Yes, she said again, lifting her chin. Is that a problem? The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Everyone runs from something. He turned and began walking toward the boulders where Moses waited. After a moment, Sarah May followed. They walked in silence, their shadows long in the morning light. The desert smelled clean after the rain. Sage and creosote sharp in the air. Puddles reflected the sky. And here and there, tiny purple flowers had bloomed overnight, taking advantage of the moisture. Moses stood hobbled near the rocks, looking none the worse for his night in the storm. He whickered when he saw Sarah May, more in annoyance than greeting. The man had already fashioned a crude harness from rope, and Sarah May's saddle, which she'd managed to throw from the wagon, sat nearby, relatively dry. The wagon cannot be fixed, the man said, running his hand along Moses's flank, checking for injuries. But he is strong, can carry you and your supplies. To where? The question came out more desperate than she'd intended. I can't go back. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed under that steady gaze. His eyes moved from her face to the bruise on her collarbone, to the way she held herself, ready to bolt or fight. There is a trading post, he said finally. Fort Defiance, 3 days riding. They have supplies. Protection. Protection. She tasted the word, found it bitter. A woman alone at a fort full of soldiers? Understanding flickered in his eyes. The commander's wife runs a boarding house, respectable, safe for women. Sarah May wanted to ask how he knew this, why he was helping her, what he expected in return. But the question stuck in her throat. In her experience, men always wanted something, as if reading her thoughts. He stepped back, giving her space. I go that direction. The choice is yours. He moved to gather wood for a fire, leaving her to think. Sarah May watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed to blend into the landscape rather than fight against it. Everything about him was foreign to her, his calm, his silence, the way he offered help without demanding gratitude. What's your name? She asked suddenly. He paused in his gathering. Jacob, he said. Jacob Crowfeather. I'm Sarah May She stopped. Thornton was William's name, had never really been hers. Sarah May, she finished. He nodded as if understanding her hesitation. Sarah May, who runs north instead of south. Despite everything, she almost smiled. That's me. They made a simple camp near the broken wagon. Jacob built a fire with practiced ease, while Sarah May salvaged what she could from the wagon bed. The Bible had survived, pages damp but intact. She held it for a moment, remembering her mother reading from it by candlelight, then packed it away. Faith was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. As the sun climbed higher, Jacob prepared a simple meal from his supplies. Cornmeal cakes cooked on hot stones, dried berries, and strong tea from herbs she didn't recognize. They ate in companionable silence, and Sarah May found herself relaxing slightly. There was something about his presence, steady and unthreatening, that made the constant tension in her shoulders ease. Your husband, Jacob said eventually, not looking at her. He will follow? Sarah May's hand stilled halfway to her mouth. He's not anymore. She forced herself to continue eating, though the food had turned to sand in her mouth. And yes, maybe, he's proud. Pride makes men dangerous. Yes, she whispered. Jacob reached into his pack and pulled out something wrapped in leather. He unwound it carefully, revealing a knife with a carved bone handle. The blade caught the sunlight, well honed and clean. A gift, he said, setting it on the ground between them. Every person should have a way to defend themselves. Sarah May stared at the knife. In 3 years of marriage, William had given her bruises, harsh words, and empty promises. This stranger offered her a weapon and asked nothing in return. Why? The word came out cracked. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. My sister, he said finally. She married a white man from the settlements. Thought love would be enough. It wasn't. He touched the scar on his face absently. I tried to bring her home. Too late. The weight of that story, told in so few words, settled between them. Sarah May reached for the knife, her fingers closing around the smooth bone handle. It felt right in her hand, balanced and sure. Thank you, she said. He nodded and stood, moving to prepare Moses for travel. Sarah May watched him work, seeing him differently now. Not just a stranger who'd offered shelter, but someone who understood loss, who carried his own ghosts. As they prepared to leave, Sarah May took one last look at the broken wagon. It had carried her this far, but its journey was over, like her marriage, like the life she'd known in Silver Creek. It would remain here in the desert, slowly being reclaimed by sand and time. Ready? Jacob asked, holding Moses's lead rope. Sarah May adjusted the knife on her belt, felt the weight of the pistol in her carpet bag, straightened her shoulders. The sun was full up now, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Somewhere behind them, William might be waking from another drunken stupor, might be discovering her absence, might be gathering men to hunt her down. But that was behind. Ahead lay Fort Defiance, and beyond that, a life she couldn't yet imagine. Yes, she said, and meant it. They set out across the desert, Jacob walking ahead, leading Moses with Sarah May in the saddle. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable now, filled with the creak of leather, the soft thud of hooves on sandy ground, and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. As they walked, Sarah May found herself studying Jacob's back, the way he moved through the landscape like he belonged to it. She thought of his words by the fire. Everyone runs from something. She wondered what had sent him into these wild places, what ghosts followed in his footsteps. The sun climbed toward its zenith, and the desert shimmered with heat. But Sarah May no longer felt alone. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, she had a destination, supplies, and, strange as it seemed, an ally. When Jacob paused to check their direction, studying landmarks invisible to her eyes, he glanced back at her. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. Two damaged souls finding each other in the vastness of the desert. Then he turned and continued walking, and she followed, the knife heavy and reassuring at her side. Whatever lay ahead, William's pursuit, the unknown dangers of Fort Defiance, the uncertain future, she would face it. Not alone this time, but with someone who understood that sometimes the only choice was to keep moving forward, one step at a time, into the vast and waiting darkness. The fire crackled between them as stars emerged in the darkening sky. They had made camp in a shallow depression between two mesas, sheltered from the wind but open enough to see anyone approaching. Sarah May sat with her back against a smooth boulder, the knife Jacob had given her resting across her lap. She'd spent the last hour learning its weight, its balance, while he tended to Moses and gathered wood. Now they sat in the orange glow of firelight, the vast desert night pressing in around them. Jacob had made a simple meal of rabbit he'd snared earlier, seasoned with wild herbs that gave the meat an earthy, almost medicinal flavor. They ate without speaking, but the silence had shifted from comfortable to expectant, as if the darkness demanded words. You should not be alone here, Jacob said finally, his voice barely above the crackling fire. He wasn't looking at her but at the flames, as if seeing something in their dance. This land, it takes those who are alone. Sarah May set down her tin plate, her appetite suddenly gone. I didn't have much choice. There is always choice. Sometimes all of them are hard. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Stay and die slow, or leave and die fast. You didn't die, he pointed out. You're here because of you. He shook his head slightly. Because you kept walking in the storm. Because you saw the fire and came toward it instead of away. Because you chose to trust. He looked at her then, firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. That takes strength. Sarah May felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. She'd cried enough tears for William Thornton. He told me I was weak, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Every day, weak, worthless, barren. Said no other man would have me, damaged as I was. Words, Jacob said quietly, can cut deeper than blades, but they are not the truth. How do you know? The question came out harsh, challenging. How do you know what's true about me? He was quiet for a long moment, then stood and moved around the fire to sit closer, though still maintaining a respectful distance. May I? He asked, gesturing to her hand. Sarah May hesitated, then extended her hand palm up. Jacob took it gently, his calloused fingers barely touching her skin. He turned her hand in the firelight, examining it like he might read a map. Here, he said, tracing a faint scar across her palm. From work, these calluses, from reins and rope and labor, this strength in your grip, that comes from fighting to survive. He released her hand carefully. Weak people don't have hands like yours. Sarah May stared at her palm, seeing it differently, not the hand of a failed wife, but of a survivor. He hit me, she said quietly. Not at first. At first he was charming, said I was the prettiest girl in Silver Creek, said he'd give me a good life, but after we married, when the months passed and no child came, she touched her belly unconsciously. That's when it started, the drinking, the words, then the fists. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting her speak. The last time, she continued, he said things, terrible things, about what I was good for, what he'd let his friends. She couldn't finish, but she didn't need to. Understanding darkened Jacob's face. That's when I knew. If I stayed, I'd disappear, not die, maybe, but disappear. Whatever was left of me. So you took his gun and left. 3 nights ago. Waited until he passed out drunk. Took what money I could find. The gun, some food. Thought I could make it to California. Start over where no one knew me. She laughed bitterly. Couldn't even make it out of the territory. You made it here, Jacob said. That's farther than many would have gotten. They sat in silence for a while, the fire popping and sending sparks spiraling up toward the stars. Sarah May found herself studying Jacob's profile in the dancing light. The scar that marked his face, the way he held himself, alert even in rest. Your sister, she said softly. Will you tell me about her? Pain flickered across his features, quickly hidden. Mary Small Dove, that's what our people called her. She was light, like morning, always laughing, always seeing good where others saw none. He picked up a stick and poked at the fire. The missionary school taught her to read, to speak English perfectly. She thought it would help her walk in both worlds. But it didn't. It made her attractive to men who wanted an educated wife, but not an equal. His voice carried old anger, carefully controlled. James Hartley owned a store in Albuquerque, promised her the world, promised our father he'd treat her well. We believed him. Sarah May waited, knowing the shape of the story already. 2 years she was gone. Then a trader came through our village, mentioned seeing her, said she looked... He stopped, searching for words. Not like morning anymore. I went to bring her home. The scar, Sarah May said softly. He touched it absently. Hartley had friends. They didn't want her to leave. Said she was his property, bought and paid for. His hand dropped. I got her out, but she was already dying. Not from wounds you could see, from the inside. Like you said, she disappeared. I'm sorry. She lived 3 days, long enough to tell me not to blame myself, long enough to make me promise. He stopped. Promise what? To remember that not all people are like him, that darkness exists, but so does light. He looked at her directly. I've kept half that promise. Remembered the darkness plenty. Sarah May felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't known were there. Here was someone who understood, who'd seen what happened when love became possession, when promises became prisons. Is that why you helped me? She asked. Because of her? Jacob considered this. At first, maybe, but now, he seemed to struggle with words. You're not her. You're not weak, not disappearing. You're here, fighting. That's different. I don't feel like I'm fighting. I feel like I'm running. Sometimes running is fighting. Sometimes surviving is victory. He stood, moved back to his original spot across the fire. You asked about truth earlier. Here's one. You survived William Thornton. Many don't survive men like him. Sarah May absorbed this, felt it settle into her bones. She had survived, was surviving still. There's something else, she said, surprising herself. The bruises, the broken things, those weren't the worst. The worst was how he made me small. Every day, smaller. Couldn't cook right. Couldn't keep house right. Couldn't give him children. Made me believe I was failing at the only things that mattered. What matters to you? Jacob asked. The question caught her off guard. What did matter to her? For 3 years, her world had shrunk to the size of William's moods, his demands, his disappointments. I used to draw, she said slowly, remembering. Before, my mother taught me. Charcoal sketches of the hills around our farm. The horses, the way light fell through leaves. William said it was foolishness, a waste of time when there was real work to do. Drawing is seeing truly. Jacob said, That's not foolishness. I haven't drawn in years. Hands don't forget. When you're ready, they'll remember. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. It was just the desert being itself, honest in its wildness. We should sleep, Jacob said. Tomorrow will be long. Sarah May nodded but didn't move yet. Jacob, thank you for listening, for not, she struggled to find the words, for not looking at me like I'm broken. We're all broken, he said simply. Some of us just carry it differently. He began banking the fire for the night. But broken things can heal, not the same as before, maybe, but sometimes stronger, as she rolled up in her blanket. Sarah May thought about that. Not the same as before, but stronger. It seemed impossible now, feeling as fragile as she did. But Jacob had lost his sister, carried that scar on his face and deeper ones besides. Yet he moved through the world with purpose, with strength. Maybe that was enough for now, knowing that survival was possible, that broken didn't mean finished. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging. Somewhere out there, William might be searching for her, might be telling men she was his runaway property, might be promising rewards for her return. But here, in this circle of dying firelight with a scarred warrior keeping watch, she was just Sarah May, not wife, not possession, not failure, just a woman learning to breathe again in the vast silence of the desert night. Before sleep took her, she heard Jacob humming softly, a melody she didn't recognize, low and rhythmic like wind through stone. It spoke of distances and endurance, of things lost and things enduring. She let it carry her down into darkness, and for the first time in years, her dreams were not of walls closing in, but of wide spaces waiting to be crossed. Tomorrow they would continue toward Fort Defiance. Tonight, she was learning the first lesson of the desert, how to exist in the space between what was and what might be, finding strength in the simple act of drawing breath after breath under an infinite sky. The narrow canyon walls rose like ancient sentinels on either side, their red stone faces carved by wind and time into flowing patterns. Jacob led the way, his movements careful and deliberate as they descended into what he called the Valley of Whispers, a sacred place known only to his people and a few trusted others. Sarah May followed on Moses, having to duck occasionally as the path wound beneath overhanging rocks. The morning air was cool in the shadow of the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and something else, water. After 3 days of dry travel, the promise of water made her throat ache with anticipation. "Here," Jacob said, stopping at a place where the canyon walls were marked with faded paintings, spirals and handprints, figures that might have been human or spirit. "We leave the mule." He helped her dismount, his hand steady on her waist for just a moment before stepping back. Sarah May had grown accustomed to his careful distance, the way he offered help without presuming intimacy. It was so different from William's grabbing hands, always taking, always demanding. They left Moses tethered where he could reach a patch of grass. Then Jacob led her through a crack in the canyon wall that she wouldn't have seen without him pointing it out. The passage was narrow enough that they had to turn sideways in places, and Sarah May fought down a surge of panic as the walls pressed close. Then, suddenly, they emerged into openness. The hidden valley spread before them like something from a dream. A natural spring bubbled up from the rocks, feeding a pool of crystal-clear water that reflected the morning sky. Cottonwoods grew around the pool, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The walls of the valley were painted with more ancient art, and at the far end, a natural shelf of rock formed a kind of altar. "My people have come here for generations," Jacob said quietly. "To heal, to think, to remember who we are when the world tries to make us forget." Sarah May stood transfixed. After the harsh beauty of the open desert, this hidden oasis felt like stepping into another world. I don't have words. Words aren't needed here." He moved to the pool's edge, kneeling to cup water in his hands. "Come, drink." She knelt beside him, the cool stone smooth beneath her knees. The water was cold and sweet, tasting of minerals and time. As she drank, she felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. They spent the morning in that sacred space. Jacob showed her how to read the signs his ancestors had left, which plants could heal, which could harm, how to find direction by the shadows on the stone. He moved differently here, she noticed, more relaxed, as if the valley recognized him and welcomed him home. "Your people," Sarah May said as they sat in the shade of a cottonwood. "Where are they now?" "Scattered," he replied. "Some on the reservation, some in the mountains, some walking between worlds, like me." He picked up a smooth stone, turning it in his fingers. "The army came when I was 15, said we had to leave, go to the place they'd chosen for us. My father fought. My mother tried to make peace. In the end, it didn't matter what we wanted. But you're here. I left the reservation at 20. Couldn't breathe there, surrounded by fences and rules and white men telling us how to live. Been moving ever since. Scout sometimes. For wagon trains that treat people fair. Hunt, trade, whatever keeps me free." Sarah May understood that need for freedom, felt it burning in her own chest. "Don't you get lonely?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Yes, but lonely is better than caged." They sat in companionable silence, watching the light shift across the water. Then Jacob stood, gesturing for her to follow. He led her to a flat area near the pool where the earth was soft with sand. "First lesson," he said, "breathing." Sarah May almost laughed. "I know how to breathe." "No?" His voice was gentle but firm. "You know how to take air in and push it out? That's not the same." He placed his hand on his own chest, demonstrating. "Breathe from here, deep, like the earth breathing." She imitated him, feeling foolish at first, but as they stood there, breathing in rhythm, something began to shift. The constant tension she carried started to ease. Her shoulders dropped, her fists uncurled. "Good," Jacob said. "Now, with the breath, let go. Whatever he told you, whatever you believe about yourself, let it go with the air. I can't just try." So she did. Breathe in clean desert air, freedom, possibility. Breathe out. William's voice calling her worthless, the weight of failure, the fear that had lived in her bones for 3 years, in and out, until she felt dizzy with it. "Steady," Jacob said, his hand hovering near her elbow, not quite touching. "Find your center. I don't know what that means. Here, He moved behind her, still maintaining that careful distance. Close your eyes. Feel where your strength lives. Not in your arms or legs. Deeper. The place that made you leave. That made you survive the storm. Find that. Sarah May closed her eyes, aware of his presence behind her, solid and unthreatening. She breathed and searched inside herself for what he described. And there, beneath the fear and hurt and anger, she found it. A small, fierce flame that had refused to be extinguished despite everything. I feel it, she whispered. Hold on to that. That's your truth. Not his words, not anyone's judgment, just that flame. They spent the next hour on simple movements, how to stand in a way that made her harder to knock down, how to walk without telegraphing fear, how to be aware of her surroundings without paranoia. Jacob never touched her without permission, always demonstrated on himself first. Let her find her own way to each lesson. Why are you teaching me this? She asked as they paused to drink from the spring. You have a knife. You should know how to use it, but more. He seemed to search for words. Fighting isn't always about weapons. Sometimes it's about knowing you can. Changes how you move in the world. He was right. Already she felt different, still afraid, still wounded, but less like prey. As the sun reached its peak, Jacob led her to the altar stone. Offerings lay there, feathers, polished stones, scraps of cloth. He added his own, a small piece of turquoise from his pouch. Make an offering, he said. Something for something. That's the way. Sarah May thought of what she had. Money. But that seemed wrong here. The gun. But she might need it. Then she remembered. From her carpet bag, she drew out a small silver locket. The one thing of value William had given her that wasn't tainted by what came after. Inside was a photograph of herself on their wedding day, young and hopeful and ignorant. She opened the locket, looked at that girl one last time, then closed it and placed it on the altar. What did you ask for? Jacob asked softly. Nothing. I gave her away, the girl who believed his lies. She touched the locket with one finger. Let her rest here where it's peaceful. Jacob nodded approval. Sometimes letting go is the greatest prayer. They left the valley as afternoon shadows began to lengthen, climbing back through the narrow passage to where Moses waited. Sarah May felt changed, though she couldn't quite say how. Lighter, maybe, or just more present in her own body. As Jacob helped her mount Moses, his hands lingered for just a moment on hers. You did well today? I had a good teacher. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Then he turned to lead them back to the trail, but not before she caught the slight smile that curved his lips. They made camp that night near a cluster of ancient junipers, as Sarah May practiced the movements he'd taught her. Jacob watched from his place by the fire, offering occasional corrections. The knife felt more natural in her hand now, less like a foreign object and more like an extension of her will. Tomorrow we reach Fort Defiance, he said as she rejoined him by the fire. After that, I start over. She finished. Become someone new. Not new, he corrected gently. Become who you always were, before he tried to make you small. Sarah May considered this as she gazed into the fire, in the hidden valley, placing that locket on the altar. She'd felt something shift. Not healing, that would take time, but a beginning, a reclaiming. Jacob? She said softly. That place today. Thank you for showing me. It was meant for you to see. The valley chooses who enters. How do you know? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you saw the paintings. Not everyone does. Some people walk right past and see only stone. He met her eyes across the fire. You have the sight. Maybe always did. Maybe that's why he tried so hard to blind you. The truth of it rang through her like a bell. William had sensed something in her. Artist's eyes. A spirit that wouldn't quite break, and had tried to crush it. But here in the desert, guided by a man who moved between worlds, she was remembering how to see. As sleep took her, Sarah May thought of the valley, of ancient hands pressing paint to stone, leaving messages for those who would come after. Tomorrow she would reach Fort Defiance, would begin building a new life. But today, in a hidden place where the earth still breathed sacred, she had begun to remember how to breathe as well. The tracks appeared at dawn, 5 horses, maybe 6, their hoofprints fresh in the sandy wash they'd crossed the previous evening. Jacob knelt beside them, reading the story written in disturbed earth. Sarah May remained mounted on Moses, her hand instinctively moving to the knife at her belt. "How old?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the grim set of his jaw. "Hours, maybe less." He stood, scanning the horizon. Moving fast, not trying to hide their trail. "It's him." The words came out flat, devoid of the panic she'd expected to feel. "William. He found men to ride with him." Jacob moved to his pack, checking his rifle, though his movements remained unhurried. "They're ahead of us. Probably reached Fort Defiance already. Asking questions. Then we can't go there." "No." He looked up at her, his dark eyes steady. "But running won't end this. Men like him, they don't stop." Sarah May felt the truth of it settle in her stomach like a cold stone. She'd known, even as she'd fled Silver Creek, that William wouldn't simply let her go. His pride wouldn't allow it. She was his property in his mind, no different from a horse or a piece of furniture. "There's another way," Jacob said, studying the tracks again. "They expect you to run, to hide. What if you don't? You mean face them?" Her voice didn't shake, which surprised her. "Not alone." He stood, decision made. "My cousin lives a day's ride north. Former Army scout, has friends. Good men who don't hold with those who hurt women, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It means trusting people you don't know. Means maybe fighting." Sarah May thought of the lessons in the hidden valley, the flame inside her that refused to die. "I'm tired of running." They changed direction, heading north into rougher country. Jacob set a hard pace, but not reckless. He knew the land, knew where to find cover, where to watch for pursuit. As they rode, he told her about his cousin, Samuel Crow Feather, who'd taken an English first name to make dealing with whites easier but never forgot who he was. Fought in the war between the states, Jacob said, came home to find his land sold, his family scattered. Could have turned bitter. Instead, he gathered others like him, men without a place, but with honor. They freight supplies, hunt, sometimes track for the law. Good men living by their own code. The sun climbed higher, and with it, Sarah May's unease. Every dust devil on the horizon could be riders. Every shadow might hide pursuit. But Jacob remained calm, and his steadiness anchored her. They stopped at midday to rest Moses and eat dried meat in the shade of a red rock overhang. Jacob had been watching their back trail, and now he pointed to a dust plume in the distance. "They found where we turned north," he said. 2 hours behind. Maybe less. Will we make it to your cousin? Not before dark. He considered their options with the same calm he brought to everything. "There's a place, Box Canyon, about 5 miles ahead. Defensible. If they want you back, they'll have to work for it." Sarah May's mouth went dry. "You mean make a stand?" "I mean, make them think. Right now they're chasing a scared woman. Let them find something else." They reached the Box Canyon as afternoon shadows grew long. It was perfect for defense. Narrow entrance, high walls, a spring-fed pool at the back, and plenty of cover among the fallen rocks. Jacob worked quickly, positioning their supplies, checking sight lines, teaching Sarah May where to position herself. "You don't have to kill anyone," he said, seeing her grip the pistol with white knuckles. "Just make them cautious. Men are brave when they think it's easy, less so when bullets start flying. What about you? I'll be where I need to be." He checked his rifle one more time. "Remember your breathing. Remember your center. And Sarah May?" He waited until she met his eyes. "They will come, but you are not alone now." The words settled into her bones, truer than any marriage vow had ever been. They came at sunset, when the light was tricky, and shadows played games with perception. 6 riders, as Jacob had predicted. William rode in front, his familiar bulk making Sarah May's stomach clench. The others were hired guns by their look, hard men with harder lives written on their faces. They stopped just outside effective rifle range, and William's voice carried across the desert air. "Sarah May, I know you're in there, woman. Come on out. No need for anyone to get hurt." She almost laughed at that. No need for anyone to get hurt. As if he hadn't been hurting her for 3 years. "You hear me?" William called again. "You're my wife. The law's on my side. These men are witnesses. Just come peaceful, and we'll forget this foolishness." Jacob touched her shoulder lightly. "Your choice," he said quietly. "We can still run. Circle back. Lose them in the dark." Sarah May looked at him, this man who'd offered her shelter, protection, and most importantly, choice. Then she looked at William, red-faced and impatient on his horse, so sure she would fold, so certain of his ownership. "No," she said. "No more running." She stood, making herself visible among the rocks. "I'm not coming back." "William, the hell you're not." His face darkened further. "You're my wife." "Was," she called back, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "That ended when you raised your hand to me. When you—" She stopped, not wanting to give these strangers the details of her humiliation. "I left of my own free will. I'm not your property." "The law says different," one of the other men shouted. "Now you come on out, little lady, before someone gets hurt." "The only people getting hurt," Jacob's voice rang out from somewhere to her left, "are those who don't turn around now." The men shifted uneasily, realizing she wasn't alone. William's face went from red to purple. "Who's that? You whoring already? Sarah May? Couldn't wait to spread your legs for the first savage you found?" The words should have shamed her. A week ago. They would have. But now they just sounded like what they were, the desperate attempts of a small man to make others as small as himself. "This is Jacob Crowfeather," she called back. "A man who knows how to treat people with respect. And there are others watching. Good men who don't take kindly to those who abuse women. Leave now. William, find yourself another wife to torment. I'm done." "I'll see you dead first," William roared, and went for his gun. The canyon erupted. Jacob's rifle cracked from the rocks. Another shot came from higher up, not Jacob, Sarah May realized. He hadn't lied about others watching. William's horse reared, and he fought to control it as bullets whined off the rocks. Sarah May fired the pistol, aiming high, not trying to kill but to add to the chaos. The hired guns, realizing they'd ridden into an ambush, began backing their horses away. Only William pressed forward, rage making him reckless. "Not worth dying for another man's marriage troubles," one of the hired guns shouted, wheeling his horse around. Others followed, leaving William suddenly alone at the canyon mouth. "Cowards!" he screamed after them. Then, to Sarah May, "This isn't over. You're mine. You hear me? Mine!" Another rifle shot, this one so close it knocked William's hat off. He finally seemed to realize his position, alone, outgunned, with darkness falling. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "Both of you. I'll be back with the law, with papers. You can't just—" "I can," Sarah May said, stepping fully into view, no longer hiding. "I did. And if you come after me again, William Thornton, if you send men after me, if you so much as speak my name in anger—" She raised the pistol, sighted down the barrel at him. "I won't aim high next time." For a moment, they stared at each other across the distance, the woman he'd tried to break and the man who'd failed to break her. Then William yanked her horse around and spurred it viciously, disappearing into the gathering darkness. Sarah May stood there, pistol still raised, until Jacob appeared beside her. Gently, he placed his hand over hers, lowering the weapon. "It's done," he said softly. "He's gone. For now. Maybe, maybe not. Men like him are cowards at heart. Face down once, they often stay down." He took the pistol from her trembling hands. "You did well. I didn't kill him." She wasn't sure if that was regret or relief in her voice. Killing is easy, Jacob said. Choosing not to kill when you have cause, that takes strength. Other figures emerged from the rocks. 3 men, native and mixed blood by their appearance, rifles casual in their hands. They nodded to Jacob, looked at Sarah May with something like approval, then melted back into the landscape without a word. Samuel's men, Jacob explained. They were tracking your husband's group. Thought there might be trouble. Will they make sure he leaves? They'll follow him to the territory border, make sure he understands the price of coming back. As the adrenaline faded, Sarah May began to shake. Jacob led her to the pool at the back of the canyon, where she knelt and splashed cold water on her face. In the reflection, she saw herself, dirty, exhausted, but with something new in her eyes. Not fear, not submission, something fiercer. You're different, Jacob observed, crouching beside her. I am, she agreed. I chose to be. They made camp there in the canyon, building a fire against the chill of the desert night. Sarah May found herself oddly calm, as if facing William had burned away the last of her fear. She was still the same woman who'd fled Silver Creek, but also not. The desert had changed her, and Jacob had shown her she had always had the power to change herself. What now? She asked as they sat by the fire. Now you're free, Jacob said simply. Fort Defiance, California. Anywhere you choose. The world is open to you. And you? He was quiet for a moment. I go where I'm needed, where the wind takes me. Sarah May studied his profile in the firelight. This man who'd appeared when she needed him most, who'd asked nothing but given everything. The wind might take you wherever I go, she said softly. If you wanted. He turned to look at her, something shifting in his dark eyes. It might, he agreed. If you wanted. They left it there for now, a possibility hanging between them like the stars overhead. Tomorrow would bring decisions, directions, futures to choose. But tonight, in a canyon where she'd finally stood her ground, Sarah May Thornton, no, just Sarah May now, was free. And that was enough to start with. The moon hung full and bright, turning the canyon walls to silver. Sarah May couldn't sleep, adrenaline still singing in her veins from the confrontation. She sat by the dying fire, cleaning the pistol with methodical movements Jacob had taught her. When she heard them, horses, moving fast, too many to count in the darkness, Jacob materialized beside her, rifle ready. They came back, he said quietly, with more men. Sarah May's heart sank, but her hands remained steady on the gun. How many? 10, maybe 12. His voice carried no fear, only assessment. They're spreading out, trying to surround the canyon. She stood, checking the knife at her belt, the pistol loaded and ready. The fear was there, but underneath it, something else, anger. Pure, clean anger that William couldn't accept, no, couldn't let her go, would chase her to the ends of the earth rather than admit she wasn't his to own. Sarah May. Jacob's hand touched her shoulder. There's a way out, through the back, over the rocks. We can still… No. The word came out firm, surprising them both. I'm done running, done hiding. If it ends here, at least it ends with me standing up. He studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded. Then we make them pay for every step. They took positions among the rocks, Jacob showing her where the moonlight created shadows. Where the approach was most difficult, he moved with deadly grace, every action purposeful. Sarah May tried to match his calm, but her heart hammered against her ribs. The first shot came from the canyon mouth, a probe, testing their response. Jacob answered with his rifle, the crack echoing off stone, then silence, tense and waiting. Sarah May, William's voice, closer than expected. Last chance, woman, come out now. Or we're coming in, and my boys here, well, they ain't as gentle as me. Laughter from the darkness, ugly and promising violence. Sarah May's skin crawled, but she raised her voice strong and clear. The only thing coming, William, is regret. For every one of you who sets foot in this canyon. Brave words from a whore, Another voice called, "Let's see how brave you are when—" The speaker never finished. A shot from high on the canyon wall, not Jacob, who was beside her, cut off his words. Sarah May remembered the other men, Samuel's scouts, still out there watching. Then chaos erupted. They came from 3 directions at once, dark shapes against moonlit stone. Jacob's rifle spoke repeatedly, measured shots that found their targets. Sarah May fired when she had clear shots, no longer aiming high. A man cried out, clutching his shoulder. Another stumbled and fell, whether from her shot or Jacob's. She couldn't tell, but there were too many. A figure loomed out of the darkness to her right. Sarah May spun, bringing the pistol up, but he was too close. Hard hands grabbed her wrist, twisting. The gun fell from nerveless fingers. "Got her," the man shouted, his breath foul with whiskey and tobacco. "The bitches!" Sarah May's knife found his ribs. She felt it slide between them, felt his shocked gasp against her ear. The hands loosened, and she pulled the blade free as he staggered back, looking down at the spreading dark stain on his shirt with surprise. You stabbed me," he said, almost wonderingly, before his knees buckled. Sarah May stared at what she'd done, the knife slick in her hand. First blood, first kill. But there was no time to process it. More shapes in the darkness, more threats converging. Jacob appeared beside her, moving like smoke, his rifle empty. He fought with knife and hands, a warrior trained from childhood. But even he couldn't be everywhere. William emerged from behind a boulder, pistol aimed at Jacob's back. Time slowed. Sarah May saw it all, the triumph on her former husband's face. Jacob turning too late, the moment of decision crystallizing. She threw the knife. It wasn't a perfect throw, she'd only learned days ago, but it was enough. The blade caught William in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shot went wide, sparking off stone. Then Sarah May was moving, scooping up a fallen man's rifle, working the lever like Jacob had shown her. She stood over William as he writhed on the ground, the knife still in his shoulder, his gun hand useless. "You were wrong," she said, her voice strange to her own ears. "I'm not weak, not worthless, not yours." She aimed the rifle at his head. "I regret nothing." William's eyes went wide, real fear finally replacing arrogance. "Sarah May, please, that's not my name anymore." She said, "Sarah May died in Silver Creek, beaten down by your words, your fists, your hate." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "You killed her, William, but something else was born, something you should have feared more. Please," he whispered. "I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll never—" Liar. But she didn't pull the trigger. Not because he deserved mercy, but because she was more than what he'd tried to make her. "You're not worth the weight on my soul." A rifle butt to his temple ended his pleas. He slumped unconscious. And Sarah May felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, just empty finality. The fighting had died down. Several bodies lay still in the moonlight. Others had fled, their courage evaporating when they realized this wasn't the easy prey they'd expected. Jacob stood nearby, blood on his shirt, not his own, watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. "It's over," he said quietly. "Is it?" Sarah May looked down at William's unconscious form. "He'll wake. He'll heal. He'll tell stories about the crazy woman who needs to be put down." "No!" Another voice, gravelly and sure. A man stepped from the shadows, older than Jacob, wearing a mix of cavalry uniform and native dress. Samuel Crowfeather, she guessed. He'll wake to find himself arrested. Horse theft from the Navajo, federal crime. He'll see prison, not you. "But you didn't see him take those horses?" Samuel's eyes glinted with dark humor. "Shame. Good thing my scouts did. Even got bills of sale from the rightful owners. Men who'd beat a woman would surely steal horses. Wouldn't you say?" Sarah May understood. A convenient fiction that would put William away, keep him from her without making her a fugitive. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel nodded, then looked at his cousin. "You all right?" "Yes." Jacob moved to Sarah May's side. Not touching, but close enough that she felt his warmth. We're all right. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Samuel's men dealt with the bodies, the wounded, the legal fictions that would become truth. William was bound and gagged, thrown over a horse to be delivered to Fort Defiance in federal custody. His hired guns, those who survived, scattered to the four winds, wanting no part of what had become a deadly serious fight. As dawn broke, Sarah May stood at the canyon rim, watching the sun paint the desert gold. She still wore her torn dress, still had blood on her hands, but she stood straight and unafraid. "What you said to him," Jacob said, joining her, "about something else being born." "What is that something?" She considered the question, watching an eagle circle in the distance. "I don't know yet, but I want to find out. That could take time, could take traveling, could take—" He paused, unusual uncertainty in his voice. "Could take a companion who knows the trails." Sarah May turned to look at him fully. This man who'd saved her, taught her, stood beside her in violence and victory, who looked at her now not as property or prize, but as equal. "I know a man who might do," she said softly, "if he's willing." "He's willing." The words came quick. "Sure, then," softer, "near you. I am no longer a warrior, only a man, and I'm no longer a victim." Sarah May replied, "Only a woman? Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything." Samuel approached, breaking the moment but not the connection. "Trail's clear to Fort Defiance, or anywhere else you might want to go. World's big. Lots of places for people to start over." Sarah May looked at Jacob, decision crystallizing. "West," she said, "all the way to California, or Oregon, somewhere I can draw mountains and never see another cage." "Long journey," Samuel observed. "Dangerous for a woman alone." "Good thing I'm not alone." She met Jacob's eyes. "Not anymore." They left the canyon as the sun climbed higher. Sarah May on Moses, Jacob walking beside her as always. Behind them lay blood and violence and the death of who she'd been. Ahead lay unknown trails and the promise of becoming. She thought of William, bound for prison, and whatever justice awaited him. She felt no pity, no regret. He'd shaped her with his cruelty. Yes, but in trying to break her, he'd instead forged her into something unbreakable. The knife rode clean at her belt. The pistol was loaded and ready. But more than weapons, she carried the knowledge that she'd faced her worst fear and survived, had fought and won, had chosen mercy not from weakness but from strength. "Ready?" Jacob asked, pausing at a fork in the trail. Sarah May touched the medicine bag at her throat. A gift from Samuel, protection for the journey. She thought of her mother's Bible, salvaged from the wagon and packed carefully away. Old faith and new medicine, side by side. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm ready." They turned west, toward mountains and ocean and possibility, leaving the blood-soaked canyon behind. Sarah May didn't look back. There was nothing there for her now but shadows. Ahead, the trail beckoned, unknown and promising, and beside her walked a man who whispered truths in the darkness, who saw her not as broken but as becoming. It was enough. It was everything. It was a beginning. The tears came without warning. Sarah May sat by their campfire 3 days west of the canyon, cleaning the rifle she'd used to defend herself, when suddenly her vision blurred. The weapon slipped from her fingers as sobs tore through her, not gentle tears but violent, body-shaking grief that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long buried. Jacob looked up from where he was mending a torn pack strap, concern flickering across his features. He moved as if to come to her, then stopped, understanding that this storm had to break on its own. Sarah May cried for everything, for the girl who'd believed in love, for the woman who'd endured years of cruelty, for the blood on her hands and the man she'd left bleeding in the canyon. She cried for her mother, dead these 5 years, who'd never know her daughter had found freedom. She cried for Mary Smalldove, Jacob's sister, who hadn't, most of all. She cried because she was alive, because she'd survived, because survival had cost her something she couldn't name but felt missing. like a tooth gone from her mouth. When the tears finally stopped, she found Jacob had moved closer, sitting within reach but not touching. He offered her a cloth and his canteen, saying nothing. She cleaned her face, drank deeply, tried to find words for what had just happened. "I killed a man," she said finally, voice raw. "I put a knife in him and watched him die. Yes, I don't feel guilty." The admission came out wondering. Shouldn't I feel something? But when I think of it, there's just nothing. Guilt is for those who had choices." Jacob said quietly. "You had none. He would have hurt you, maybe killed you. You defended yourself. I know, my mind knows, but something in me is—" She struggled for words. "Broken? Missing? I don't know who I am anymore." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he shifted, sitting so they faced each other across the small fire. "There's a story my grandmother told," he began, "about a woman who was captured by enemies. They did terrible things to her, tried to make her less than human. When she finally escaped and returned to her people, she couldn't feel joy, couldn't feel sorrow, just emptiness where her spirit had been." Sarah May leaned forward, caught by the familiar pain in the tale. "What happened to her?" "She went to the holy man, asked him to fix her. He said, 'I cannot give you back what was taken, but I can show you that you're not empty. You're free, free of their hold, their poison. What feels like nothing is actually space. Space to become new.'" Did she become new? She became a warrior woman, led war parties, saved other captives. The emptiness filled slowly, but with her own choices, her own strength. He met her eyes. "You're not broken. Sarah May, you're free. The tears, that's the last of the poison leaving." She absorbed this, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. The crying had left her exhausted, but somehow cleaner, like a fever breaking. "I keep thinking I should feel like the same person," she said. "But I don't. When I look in water, I see my face, but it's like looking at a stranger." "You are a stranger. To yourself. That's what survival does. Makes us foreign to who we were." He touched his scar absently. "After my sister died, after these marks healed, I didn't know the man in the reflection. Took time to learn him." "Do you like him? The man you became?" Jacob considered this. "He's harder than the boy was. Less quick to trust, but stronger. More careful with his strength." He looked at her directly. "I see the same in you. Harder, yes, but like steel that's been through fire, flexible and strong together." Sarah May felt something ease in her chest. Not healing, too soon for that, but understanding. She wasn't supposed to feel like herself because herself had died back in that canyon. Or maybe earlier, in Silver Creek. What remained was raw material waiting to be shaped. "Show me," she said suddenly. "Show me how to be strong without being hard. How to be—" She gestured helplessly. "Whatever I'm becoming." Jacob stood, moved to an open area near their camp. "Stand," he said simply. She joined him, and he positioned her in a basic fighting stance. But this was different from the practical lessons before. This was something deeper. "Close your eyes," he instructed. "Feel the earth under your feet. You're not standing on it. You're connected to it, rooted." Sarah May tried, feeling foolish at first, but gradually. She sensed what he meant, the solid ground beneath her boots, the way her weight distributed, the sense of being anchored. "Now," Jacob continued, moving behind her. "Remember the canyon, not the fear. The moment you decided to stay and fight, find that feeling." She searched her memory, past the blood and terror, to that instant of pure decision. The anger, yes, but underneath it, something else. Determination, purpose, the absolute refusal to be a victim anymore. "Good," Jacob said softly. "That's your center. Not rage, not fear. Choice. The choice to stand." He moved around her, adjusting her stance slightly, teaching her to move from that centered place. It was like a dance, slow and deliberate, each movement flowing from the last. Sarah May found herself relaxing into it, the earlier emotional storm settling into something calmer. This is how my people teach young warriors, Jacob explained as they moved. Not just to fight, but to find peace and strength, to be dangerous without being cruel. They practiced until the stars came out, and Sarah May felt the difference. Her body was learning a new language, one that spoke of capability rather than vulnerability. When they finally stopped, she was sweating despite the cool evening air, but felt more settled than she had since leaving Silver Creek. As they prepared their simple meal, Sarah May found herself studying Jacob with new eyes. The careful way he moved, the stillness that wasn't emptiness but readiness. She understood it now. He'd been broken too, reformed into something different. The scar on his face was just the visible mark of deeper wounds that had healed into strength. Jacob, she said as they ate, what you said earlier, about being near me. You're no longer a warrior, but a man. What did you mean? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, a warrior's heart is hard. Has to be, but near you. He seemed to struggle with the words. I feel things I'd forgotten how to feel. Want things I'd given up wanting. What things? He looked at her across the fire, and the usual careful distance in his eyes was gone. A home that isn't just where I make camp. Someone to watch the stars with who sees the same patterns. Children who could walk in both worlds without choosing sides. He paused. A woman who's becoming steel and silk together, who makes me want to be more than a ghost between worlds. Sarah May's breath caught. In all their days together, this was the most he'd revealed of his heart. I don't know if I can be those things, she said honestly. I don't know if I can ever be a wife again, after. I'm not asking for you to be a wife. Jacob said, just to be whatever you become, whoever you choose to be. I would stand beside that person, if she wanted. The offer hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Not ownership, not demand, just presence, partnership. I want, Sarah May said softly, but I need time. Need to know who I am before I can know who I am with someone else. Time we have. The trail is long. They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. Sarah May felt raw still, hollowed out by tears and filled with new possibilities. She thought of the woman in Jacob's story, how emptiness became space for transformation. Tell me about drawing, Jacob said suddenly. You mentioned it before, that you used to. Surprised by the shift, Sarah May found herself smiling slightly. My mother taught me. Said women needed something that was just theirs, something no man could take away. The smile faded. William took it anyway. Said it was wasteful, foolish, burned my sketches. But not the skill, not the seeing. No, she realized. Not that. Jacob reached into his pack, pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. From Fort Defiance, he said, handing it to her. Thought maybe, when you were ready. Sarah May unwrapped it carefully, found a small leather journal and several sticks of charcoal. Her throat tightened. When did you? While you were getting supplies. Saw you looking at some in the trader's window. He shrugged, embarrassed. Hands, don't forget. You said, maybe they've been waiting. She clutched the journal, this simple gift that said more than words. He'd seen her loss, had moved to fill it without being asked. This was courtship unlike any she'd known. Not flowers and promises, but practical magic. The tools to rebuild herself. Thank you, she whispered. Draw something, he encouraged. Anything, see if the hands remember. Sarah May opened the journal to the first blank page. The charcoal felt foreign at first, too thick, too dark. Then her hand moved almost of its own accord, sketching lines that became the shape of distant mountains, the curve of Jacob's profile as he tended the fire, the dance of shadows on stone. It wasn't good. Her hand was out of practice, the proportions off, but it was hers, created from nothing but seeing and choice. William couldn't burn this. No one could take this. She kept drawing as the night deepened, filling page after page. Jacob watched sometimes, but mostly just maintained quiet presence, understanding that this too was part of becoming. When she finally set the charcoal aside, her fingers were black with it, and she felt, not healed, but healing. I'm different, she said, looking at her stained hands. But maybe different isn't empty. Maybe it's just space. Space to fill with your own choices. Jacob agreed. Your own path. Sarah May looked at him, this man who offered partnership without possession, who gave gifts that rebuilt rather than bound. Will you teach me more? Not just fighting. How to be strong and soft together. How to be yourself, he finished. Yes, if you teach me too. Teach you what? How to hope again, how to want more than just survival. He touched his chest lightly. How to let the warrior rest and the man emerge. It was a bargain. Then, two broken people helping each other become whole in new ways. Sarah May held out her charcoal-stained hand, and after a moment, Jacob took it. His grip was warm, calloused, careful. Partners, she said. Partners. He agreed. They held hands across the fire until the flames died to embers. Two souls finding their way back from emptiness to something that might, given time and trust, become fullness. The desert night sang around them, coyotes and wind and the ancient rhythm of survival becoming more than survival. Becoming life, becoming choice, becoming new. Dawn painted the valley in shades of rose and gold. The same hidden valley where Jacob had first taught her to breathe. They'd returned here after 2 months of wandering, of Sarah May learning the language of the desert and Jacob learning the language of hope. Now they stood together at the pool's edge, watching the light dance on water. Sarah May wore new clothes, practical riding clothes she'd bought with money earned from selling drawings in a mining town. Her hair, once always pinned tight, fell loose past her shoulders. The knife rode easy at her belt, but it had become tool more than weapon. She looked nothing like the terrified woman who'd stumbled from a storm months ago. This place, she said softly. It feels like coming home. Jacob nodded, his hand finding hers with the ease of new habit. They'd been traveling as partners, sharing the trail's hardships and wonders, learning each other's rhythms. The careful distance of those first days had given way to something deeper, not yet fully named, but undeniable. My grandmother said some places hold power, he replied. They wait for the right people to find them. This valley waited for you. Sarah May turned to face him, studying the face she'd drawn dozens of times now, in charcoal, in pencil, trying to capture the way strength and gentleness lived together in his features. And you? Did you wait for me? All my life, he said simply. I just didn't know it. They danced around this truth for weeks, both healing, both careful. But here, in this place of ancient peace, the pretense fell away. Sarah May reached up, traced the scar on his face with gentle fingers. I was so broken when you found me, she whispered. In pieces, still am, maybe. No. His hand covered hers, pressing it against his cheek. Not broken, reforming, like metal in a forge. And Sarah May, his voice dropped low, intimate, near you. I am no longer a warrior, only a man who wants to wake each morning knowing you're there. Jacob, his name was prayer and promise together. I want that too. Want to stop running, stop being afraid. Want to build something instead of just surviving. Then build with me, he said. Here, in this valley, there's game, water, shelter. We could make a life, not hiding from the world, but choosing our own. Sarah May's heart raced, but not from fear. This was nothing like William's proposals, full of ownership and expectation. This was partnership, freely chosen. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I'll build with you. Jacob's rare smile transformed his face, and Sarah May found herself laughing, real laughter, bubbling up from some well she'd thought dried out. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, feeling safe in the circle of his arms. My fierce one, he murmured against her hair. My survivor, my artist who sees beauty where others see only stone. My protector, she replied. My teacher, my partner who showed me strength can be gentle. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, not rushing, letting the moment stretch, Then Jacob pulled back slightly, reaching into his shirt to withdraw something on a leather cord. "This was my sister's," he said, showing her a small silver medallion marked with native symbols. "She wore it at her wedding. I took it from after, carried it to remember." He lifted it over his head, held it out to her. "I want you to have it, to remember that not all promises are prisons. Some are just hope." Sarah May took the medallion with trembling fingers. It was warm from his skin, worn smooth from years of carrying. "Are you sure? She would have liked you," Jacob said. "Would have seen a sister in your strength." Sarah May kissed him then. Soft and sure. Not the desperate kisses William had demanded, but something chosen, given freely. Jacob responded with a matching gentleness, and in that kiss was a promise of all the mornings to come. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Sarah May laughed again. "We're really doing this? Building a life in a hidden valley? If you want, we could go to California still, Oregon, anywhere." She looked around the valley, at the pool that had given her water, the walls that held ancient wisdom, the cottonwoods that whispered peace. "No, this is right. This is ours." They spent the day planning with the practical minds of survivors. Where to build their shelter, how to channel the spring water, what supplies they'd need from the nearest town. But woven through the planning was joy, touches that lingered, smiles that came easy, the deep satisfaction of choosing their future together. As afternoon wore toward evening, they sat by the pool, Sarah May sketching their plans while Jacob worked leather into what would become their wedding gifts to each other, matching knife sheaths, decorated with symbols of protection and partnership. "I need to tell you," Sarah May said suddenly, setting down her charcoal. "About William, about what I can and can't." She struggled with the words. "The marriage bed. He made it ugly, made it about power and taking. I want to share that with you, but I'm afraid." Jacob's hand stilled on the leather. "There's no hurry," he said carefully. "We have time to learn each other, to make it new, make it ours. I would never take what isn't freely given." "I know." And she did know, bone deep. "That's why I can imagine it being different, being about giving instead of taking, about choosing each other." "When you're ready," he said. "A day, a month, a year. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah May felt tears prick her eyes, good tears this time. Clean tears. "How did I find you? In all this vast desert? How did our paths cross? The old ones say there are no accidents, only spirits finding their way to where they belong." He smiled slightly. "Though I think my grandmother would say it was her doing, sending me to check that canyon route when I usually go south." They laughed together, and Sarah May marveled at how easy it had become, how natural. She'd thought William had killed this in her, the ability to trust, to open her heart. But here it was, not dead, but transformed. Wiser, perhaps, more careful, but ultimately stronger. As the stars emerged, they made their camp as they had so many nights before. But this time was different. This time they were home. Tomorrow they'd ride to the nearest town for supplies. Would begin the hard work of building. There would be challenges, winter to prepare for, the isolation to manage, the outside world that might intrude. But tonight, they sat close by their fire, planning a future neither had dared imagine. Sarah May drew by firelight sketches of the cabin they'd build, the garden she'd plant, the life they'd create. Jacob added suggestions, his practical knowledge balancing her artist's dreams. "I want to ask you something," Jacob said as the fire burned low. "The white way, with papers and ceremonies, or my people's way, with promises made to the earth and sky, or both. How do you want to be married?" Sarah May considered. "Both," she decided. "I want the world to know, but I also want the earth to witness. Want to be bound by choice, not law." "Next moon, then," Jacob suggested. "Samuel could come, bring witnesses. We could speak our promises here, where it began." "Where I began," Sarah May corrected. The woman who'll marry you was born in this valley. They sealed it with a kiss. Longer this time. Deeper. Full of promise and growing heat. Sarah May felt her body responding in ways she'd thought William had broken. Felt desire that was hers to give rather than his to take. When they parted, both shaken, she smiled. Maybe not a year, she said softly. Maybe just until I'm your wife in truth as well as heart. Whenever you're ready, Jacob repeated, but his eyes were dark with matching want. You lead, I follow. They slept that night on opposite sides of the fire as always, but the space between them hummed with possibility. Sarah May dozed and woke and dozed again, each time finding Jacob's eyes on her, protective and promising. In the gray before dawn, she rose and went to the pool. The water reflected the fading stars, and she saw herself clearly. No longer the broken woman who'd fled Silver Creek. No longer the desperate survivor who'd killed to defend herself. This was someone new, someone who'd chosen her name, her path, her partner. Sarah May Crowfeather, she tried aloud, tasting the future. It sat well on her tongue, felt right in her chest, not erasing who she'd been but building on it. Jacob appeared beside her, as she'd known he would. Having doubts? No? She turned to him, certain as sunrise. Just practicing, getting used to who I'm becoming. And who is that? Sarah May smiled, thinking of all the answers. Artist, survivor, partner, fighter, woman. But in the end, she chose the simplest truth. Yours, she said. And my own. Both together. Forever? He asked, though they both knew the answer. Forever, she confirmed. The sun broke the horizon, painting their valley in light. Somewhere beyond these walls, the world went on with its violence and demands. But here, in this sacred space, two souls had found each other across all the broken places, all the impossible odds. Sarah May took Jacob's hand, and together they faced the new day. Not running now, but standing firm. Not alone, but partnered. Not broken, but whole in new ways. The desert had tested them, scarred them, brought them together. Now it would shelter them as they built something beautiful from the ashes of what they'd survived. A love born not of innocence, but of choice. A life created not from dreams, but from the hard-won knowledge that they could face anything as long as they faced it together. Ready? Jacob asked, as he had that day by the broken wagon. Yes, Sarah May answered, as she had then. But now the word carried different weight. Not resignation, but anticipation. Not fear, but faith. They turned from the pool and walked back to their camp. Hands linked, steps matched. Behind them, the water reflected the infinite sky. Ahead lay the work of building, the joy of choosing, the peace of finding home. In the hidden valley where ancient hands had painted stories on stone, a new story began. A story of two people who'd whispered truth in the darkness and chosen to follow each other into the light. A story that would be told in the children they'd raise, the life they'd build, the love they'd nurture through all the seasons to come. The desert sang its ancient song around them, and they listened, and they knew they were exactly where they belonged. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Sarah May and Jacob's journey. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more tales of courage and love from the American frontier with you.